As you can tell, my throat is doing funky stuff, so after our service, no close greeting in case that I'm coming down with something. I don't want to start a chain reaction in here because I want to make sure everybody keeps coming every Sunday. So, now I also want to, oftentimes we have folks tell us as pastors that, well, we've already heard it in the news, we've read it, we watched it, we don't want to hear it on Sunday. But you have to hear it. You have to hear how it works with the gospel. You have to hear how you are called to correlate the two. There's an article that I read, and I think I shared with you last week, or maybe I didn't, who got fired from his church because he was being too political. His political message was similar to that of Bishop Buddy. Do good. Speak out when you're supposed to. Don't just stand on the sidelines and say, well, I'll just see what happens. That's important because, see, even in today's story, you hear Jesus telling them, you're not supposed to stand at the sidelines. You're supposed to do something. Take action. He's not asking you to go kill someone. In fact, he's asking you the opposite. He's asking you to make sure that no one dies just because. The current climate politically in our country and theologically is a mess. And I know in speaking with some of you, it's weighed heavy on you. As your pastor, I'll remind some of you that it weighs heavy on me too, because I hear your stories and I carry those stories. Hence why my therapist has a busy 1 hour every week. It helps me process that. I want you to understand that you are not alone on this journey. You have each other. You have the saying that Kyle said this morning, and that's on the opposite of this wall, on the other side, facing the parking lot. No matter who you are or where you are in that journey, you are welcome here. Now, I'll remind you, it has an invisible little asterisk saying you have any hateful rhetoric, it stays outside. And coming here, we're together as a family. And let's face it, even in our families, we don't all get along. We don't all think alike. My sisters, I love them, but you'll rarely see them in church. And that's okay. That's a relationship they have with God. That's a relationship they have with their spirituality. I'm no one to judge that. Unless I joke around and I call them heathens, then that's a different story. But I want you to think of that. I also want to remind you of how many holidays that we as Christians have and that are part of public school and government office and banks. How many closures are there because of Christianity? And this is not part of my sermon, just so you know, but it is now. And I bring this up because a lot of my colleagues and I responded to this past week's creation of a committee, of a task force, to see the persecution against Christianity. How many of you in here, and I would like to see you raise your hand, feel that you're persecuted because you're a Christian? Come on, don't be shy. Leslie wanted to raise her hand. See, I want to point that out. There are other people who practice other faiths who are being persecuted. We as Christians are not. In a sense, we are very privileged being Christians. And I will remind you, in case you have forgotten or didn't know, that our founding fathers were not Christian. I encourage you to look up the history. What was their spiritual practice? Did they have one? You'd be surprised. Some didn't affirm Christianity. Some didn't even know if there really was a God. Hence why we're supposed to have a separation of church and state. Why don't you keep that in mind, as unfortunately our political climate is affecting the average citizen in this country. I know that insulin, the cap for insulin, has been removed. I have colleagues who rely on that and now are having to worry about how much they're going to have to pay for that. So in today's reading, we encounter a pivotal moment in the disciples' life. Jesus, standing by the lake, tells Simon Peter to cast his nets again after a night of unsuccessful fishing. Simon is tired, frustrated, and doubtful, much like some of us are right now. We're tired because we said this may happen. We're frustrated because we continue to echo the same, yet it goes and is unheard. And we're doubtful because we don't see much changing. At Jesus' words, his cast his net once more, and then the result is miraculous. They catch so many fish that the nets begin to break. Story isn't just about miraculous fish catch, but about faith, trust, and willingness to step into the unknown. Right now, what's ahead of us as a country is unknown. It's uncharted waters. So, let's take a look at Thomas Edison. Have any of you heard of him? A few? I'm sure you've never heard of the inventor of the light bulb. But did you know that Edison failed thousands of times before he succeeded? He once said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Even when the odds seemed impossible, Edison kept going and changed the world. Imagine if he had given up after his first or 1,000 failure. Think about that. The lesson here is that sometimes, like Simon Peter, we need to throw our nets one more time. I have a friend that I met through ministry who is now a congresswoman. And every now and then, her posts come up on my timeline, and I avoid looking into the comments. Because you can imagine her being first-generation immigrant, or child of immigrants, not being European American, and being a woman. The comments that she gets on there. Even for a new profile picture, I guess it looked like an official picture of just the grotesque things people post. And I asked myself, how would they feel if that was their mom, or their grandma, or their sister, or their daughter? Would they be okay with people sharing the same sentiments? There's a difference between providing feedback and constructive response to the actions of our voted officials, elected officials. they're still human beings. In a different context, let's think about Malala Yousafzai. I can't pronounce her last name. At just 15 years old, Malala was shot by the Taliban for advocating for girls' education in Pakistan. The world expected her to give up, but Malala's faith in education and her belief in her calling drove her forward. After surviving the attack, Malala continued her advocacy work, even though it seemed dangerous and uncertain. Her message was clear. Despite the fears and struggles, the world needs us to cast our nets for a better future. Like Simon Peter, Malala stepped into an unknown future with courage, following the call she knew was right. Think about that, a 15-year-old. How many of you would be doing the same in her shoes at 15, or even now in your age? Another example comes from a local small business owner, Maria, who opened a bakery in a small town during a tough economic time. Many people told her it wouldn't work. There were too many challenges, high competition, rising costs, and the constant struggle to get customers in the door. Sound familiar? Bakery, church. But much like Simon Peter, Maria didn't let the doubts take over. She followed her passion, trusted in her work, and worked tirelessly with faith that things would improve. One day, her bakery was discovered by a food critic, and a steady stream of customers followed. She went from struggling small business owner to an example of resilience in her community. Maria's story reminds us that miracles can unfold when we listen to our calling, even when it seems impractical or too complicated. In all these stories, Edison's persistence, Malala's bravery, Maria's resilience, we see a common thread: the importance of trusting in a call, even when the outcome is uncertain. You know, I may have shared this before, I don't recall. I know I shared it in my ordination paper. That years back, when I first officially took my first move towards ordained ministry, while I was still Catholic, I had just met Jacob, actually a few months into that. I applied to the priesthood. And of course, some of you know that the priest in charge of vocation said, well, we'd have to send you to a psychiatrist, not psychologist, psychiatrist, and see if you're damaged goods or salvageable because of my sexuality. Think of that. This is a person who supposedly represents God, who's supposed to shepherd people, telling someone else, we'd have to see if you're damaged goods. What would that have done to you? To many, they shut down the door. That's why we have less and less people in our pews in churches across the world, in this country, because the wrong thing is said. Sometimes inadvertently, we say the wrong thing, but this was an intentional saying. But then, just kind of picking myself up and being the clown that I can be sometimes, we had a house phone. Do y'all remember those? Some of you may still have one. Kids, do you know what a house phone is? Okay. There's the internet, right? She can look at it. So there was a house phone that didn't have service, but we hadn't unplugged it. And so I picked it up. And you know, we're here where I say, you need to listen to the call. Well, God couldn't have been any clearer Because when I picked up the phone, I heard, don't ask me what the words that he was saying, but I heard Pope John Paul II on the phone. Now, scientifically, Kyle, we had a big antenna, the old TV antennas, that go like a skyscraper high attached to the house, which we didn't use. But one could say, well, the signal came off of that from the radio station and went into the phone. But then the other side of that could be just your faith and say, I needed a message and God gave me one at that moment. And again, I don't recall the words, but I know it just made me feel better. And I know it was Pope John Paul II. And when I put it down and I picked it up again just to see, I didn't get it anymore. It was a one shot. Think about that. I picked up the phone right at that moment. Didn't ring. Nothing. I just happened to pick it up. See, that's much what Jesus is asking you to do. Is be prepared to answer the call even when you don't hear the ringing. The call is there. In the gospel reading, Jesus calls Simon Peter to trust and cast his nets again. Peter does so despite his doubts, and the miracle happens. Now, in my case of that phone call, the miracle isn't so literal, but here I'm going to age myself. 20 plus years later, the miracle was I got to be an ordained clergy. Not a priest, but still ordained clergy. Think about that. A miracle doesn't always happen in the sense that we know from the Bible. A miracle can happen in different ways, different aspects. But we have to be willing to see that, to experience that, to welcome it, and to embrace it. Jesus' call to Peter wasn't just about fishing. It was about following, trusting, stepping into the unknown, and being part of something greater than oneself. Ask yourself, those of you who have been part of this church community for decades, what is more important to you, the building or the church community? The feel of family. If the building were to crumble tomorrow, does that mean the end of Christ Church UCC? Or is that just the end of the building in which Christ UCC resided? We too are asked to cast our nets, whether in our careers, relationships, community work, or faith. We're asked to trust that when we listen to God's call, we may be surprised by what happens. The outreach committee, when it started, was it last year or the year before last? Last year, right? No? 2 years ago? I don't know. I know it was over a year ago. And Judy was voluntold, in a sense, to be chair. When we started, I had somewhat of a vision of what that would be. The committee members who at that time were 3, I think, right? We're like, where do we start? I was like, I don't know. We'll see where we start. And they've come a long way. If you haven't paid attention, I encourage you to pay attention to what your fellow congregants are doing in the name of the ministry of this church. And I bring that up particularly because in March, they will be doing the Sunrise Sharing Breakfast. Basically a very continental breakfast. And thanks to George and Kathy for kind of contributing some more ideas, and for George actually going physically and getting some more stuff for that. It's in your bulletin, it's in the newsletter, and you'll be seeing it every Tuesday morning in March from 7:30 to 9:30. Whether you can afford it or not, you're welcome to come And you can pick up your breakfast, you can sit down, or you can take it to go. If you know someone, encourage them to come. In today's world, because it is a luxury item, they'll be offering a hard-boiled egg for protein. And baked muffin, among other stuff. It's a pilot. March will determine if this goes forward. March will determine how much people are receptive to coming to that. It's also a matter of you having trust in the outreach committee as your representatives and supporting them in how much you can help in. Whether it's passing out flyers to people you know, word of mouth, or saying, is there anything else that you need that we can help provide? Or the Sunday before the breakfast, helping them pack those brown bags, right? Brown bags with all the little goodies that will be going in there for Tuesday morning. It's that simple. I want you to think about that. Many of the churches in this place do offer some sort of meal per week. And this is, whether it might not seem like it, it is a big task to take on. Because you don't know if it's going to be 5 people or 50 people. So your support is extremely needed. I encourage you, make sure you're listening to that call. Because maybe your phone is on silent and it's vibrating. And if you're making too much noise, you're not going to hear that vibration. Let us pray. Loving and gracious God, thank you for calling us to follow you. We acknowledge the times we've doubted, felt that our nets were empty, and been hesitant to trust. We ask for the strength and courage to cast our nets again, knowing you are with us in every step. Help us trust your guidance, embrace the unknown with faith, and continue boldly on the path you set before us. May our hearts be open to the miracles that await when we follow your call. Amen.